Oh, and without further ado, we're going to welcome our first author to the stage, Miss Carrie.
Hello. Thank you so much, Lindsay and Simsbury Library. This is wonderful to have all these authors together for an event. So my name is Carrie Firestone, and I live in Avon, and I'm a young adult and middle grade author. So I write kid lit, and I like to start out by saying I didn't really start writing seriously until I was nearly 40, when I decided I was going to start taking writing seriously. I'm a former teacher, and I started writing books. And I wrote 2 full books, and then ultimately my third book was sold to an agent. And I joined the SCBWI, which is the Kid Lit organization that really helped propel my career. So if you're a writer and you're interested in writing Kid Lit, which is anything from board books all the way up to young adult, like age 18, I recommend SCBWI. So I have 3 books. I write young adult and middle grade fiction. And the difference really is age of protagonist. So young adult is basically high school age protagonist, and then middle grade is 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, around there. So I have 2 young adult books out. The first one is called The Loose Ends List, and it's about a young woman named Maddie who goes on an adventure around the world with her family because her grandmother is dying of cancer and wants to give her family one big adventure before she passes away. But what the hook in the book is that she's taking the family on a secret death with dignity ship. So the passengers on the ship are presumably going to be ending their own lives at the end of their adventures. So that's the Loose Ends List. That's my dog in the background. And then The Unlikelies is also young adult, and it's about a group of vigilante do-gooder teens who are fighting cyberbullying and doing good deeds in their community while helping a friend who is struggling with heroin addiction. This is also a teen book. And these 2 books are part of a 2-book deal with Little Brown. And then this summer, on July 7th, I just released my latest book called Dress Coded. This is middle grade, so the protagonist is in 8th grade, and it's about a girl who encounters an unfair dress coding situation at her middle school, and then decides to start a podcast that rallies young people in her community, and ultimately they start a mini revolution against the dress code. So I'm called what you would call a realistic fiction author. So my books are realistic, but they always have, I guess my brand is they have kind of a deep issue. So whether it's euthanasia or heroin addiction or dress coding, misogyny, it's kind of big issues, but accessible plots. So those are my 3 books, and that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carrie. Next up, we have Rick.
Hey, everybody. My name is Rick Colins. I'm a retired teacher from Simsbury Public Schools. I continue to coach track and field, but I'm in Plainville right now. When it became obvious that it was time for me to retire, not last year, but the year before, I had a lot of pent up energy. So a lot of emotions leaving a profession that I love and doing the things I love to do the most. And so I just said, I've always wanted to write a book, but I've never actually sat down to do it. And I just started writing and I couldn't stop. So I've published 4 books in the last 2 years. It's all self-publishing because I'm still looking for a publisher or an agent. So listening to what Carrie was just talking about, my themes are all very deep issue themes. I don't think that I am a traditional young adult author because the themes are pretty challenging, I think. But the books that I have sold, I've sold plenty. They have really touched a lot of young adults, but they're really books that can go all the way to the adult level. My first book is a book right here called It Emptied Us. This is a story about 4 best friends growing up in in a small town, and how one family's dealing with domestic violence. The boy and the girl of this family, their mother was beaten, and they flee, and they come to this small town where they find safety. But that kind of poison has to come out, and as these kids and the friends they make, as these kids grow older, they're athletes, and they struggle because of the fact that they've never reconciled, obviously, with the fact that they've gone through this terrible thing. So that was my first book that I wrote 2 years ago. Second one I wrote is called The Provenance of Basketball, and this is a very personal book for me, in the sense that it's based on some things that happened to me. But I have an editor. Her name is Vangela Hazel Buchanan. She works from the Writery Inc. in Bloomfield. And when I went to meet her, I thought I was meeting a white woman who owned a bookstore, and she's Black. And I had to face my own racism. I didn't know it was there, but it certainly was. And over the course of the next number of months, she and I talked about a lot of different things. We became very close friends, and it kind of inspired me to write The Provenance of Basketball, which is about a boy who goes to Providence, Rhode Island, in a neighborhood that's become mostly Black. And he tests himself against the Black players living in Providence. But he carries with him certain prejudice and racism that he has to face while he's there. And he gets caught up in their passions and their joys and the dangers that they face, because they're in a pretty tough neighborhood. And he has to rely on the people he had racism toward to help him survive this drive-by shooting. And it's, pretty heavy. But that was a hard book to write, because I had to really dig down and think about how racism, how it was, part of my life. My third book is definitely an adult book. It's called A Run of a River. And it's about these childhood friends who are all victims of sexual abuse by a baseball coach growing up. And one of the guys who, the coach is given a hometown hero award because he's been this successful baseball coach forever, but he's abused these kids, and the town has basically said nothing, mostly because they don't want to deal with the fact that, the truth of it. And it's how these best friends as adults deal with that. And the police chief, the main character, Louise Consola, ends up killing the pedophile and covers it up, because she can do nothing else but that, or else other kids will be destroyed. And pretty heavy topic. The book that I just published just came out this week. It's called Lovely Rita, and it's about a boy who's dying he's got a terrible heart condition. He's 16 years old. He's way past the time he was supposed to live. He falls in love with this mysterious girl from Africa named Rita, who moves into town. And the thing about Rita, though, is that she's been sold by her family in Ghana to a family in this particular town. And she's about to be sold down the line, which means that she's going to be, she's a domestic slave. She's going to be put someplace worse. And Jeff, the boy who with the heart condition, ends up kidnapping her to get her away from the family, because she's about to be sold. And but he's on borrowed time. So as they flee to Canada, they're being hunted by this bounty hunter. And let's just say that Jeff and Rita prevail. I won't give the topic away too much, but yeah. So those are the 4 books that I've worked on and written, and I love doing it. And I'm working on a 5th book right now called The Gale of November, which is a fictional account of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and what would happen if actually there were 30 people on the boat and one of them survived. So it's kind of a retelling, but I'm just starting with that. So that's what I've been doing and having a lot of fun doing it. And Thank you, Simsbury, for Public Library for doing this. I look forward to hearing everybody else. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick. Next up, we have Emily.
Hi. As Rick said, thank you to Simsbury Public Library for making this possible. This is actually my first time as an author doing any kind of live press. My book came out in May in a very crazy time in this world. But I'll get to that in a moment. So my name is Emily Dalton. I am 28 years old, and I spent most of the last 6 years of my life living in Brooklyn, but I have recently moved back to Simsbury. New York was a little bit of a crazy place to be, especially with a writer's salary. So I have written one book so far. It's called Be Straight With Me, and it's a memoir in verse. So if you've ever read a novel in verse, it essentially is that same format, but it is nonfiction and it's a memoir. Each chapter is more like a poem, but the poems are more like prose with line breaks. So it reads much more like an ongoing narrative than a collection of poetry. And I know personally, I had a few friends and family members who kind of put off reading it because they knew it was poetry and they weren't sure if they were going to be able to grasp this poetry. But I've gotten a lot of feedback that it is not what they were expecting. So for lack of a better synopsis on this story, I will just read the inside cover. During her sophomore year in college, Emily meets Max, you, as she calls him in the book. Not exactly a tomboy, but not quite a girly girl either. Emily is intent on finding a masculine boyfriend to assuage a deeply rooted fear that she may not be quite feminine enough. Max, a boisterous class clown beloved by his many straight guy friends, has recently come out as gay and is embracing his newly claimed identity. Initially, Max and Emily dislike each other, but they end up growing close after a makeout dare on Halloween. Then one night, Max reveals an unexpected physical attraction that catches them both by surprise. Their curious relationship begins, playfully and in secret, quickly spiraling into something more. Max and Emily's journey takes many forms. They experiment with drugs, they travel abroad, they try sleeping with other people together, and everything in between, all in the name of this bizarre, beautiful thing they call love. So that was what happened in my life, and that was something that I kind of always knew I wanted to write about. It actually started as my senior thesis project. I had no idea what I went to Middlebury College in Vermont, studied creative writing, and had no idea what I was going to write for my senior thesis, and played around with a few ideas. But halfway through the year, my advisor said, you have to write about what you care about and what is really consuming your interest and your curiosity in life. And I told him about an ongoing relationship that I was pretty consumed by, and he encouraged me to write about that. So I kind of always knew that I wanted to revisit this thesis and go back to it and maybe turn it into something more than just a senior thesis. And so I tried. And when I first started to write, it was kind of just, I didn't know where else to start aside from the beginning. So chronologically, and this obviously is very specific to memoir writing, but I went all the way back to the beginning and then retold and recorded everything that I could remember and everything that I thought about what I was remembering from 5 years of a relationship. And I guess it was much more like writing in a diary or a journal at first. It was like writing to just tell myself or to just tell the blank page, who can be a very good therapist if you are trying to do it honestly. And at the end of that blank page therapy, I had 600 pages of prose that stretched back through the sophomore year of my sophomore year of college, and then through to 2 years out of college, 2 or 3 years out of college. And it was kind of just like a really long personal manifesto that that was a very important part of my process, but it was time consuming. And if you're ever going to write something about your life, you kind of do have to put in the extra time that, like, these things that I'm writing right now are never going to make it to whatever the final version of this will be. But that was my process. So I had 600 pages of prose, cut it down to, I think, 1/3 of that length, polished it as best that I could to make it presentable for pitching out to agents, or just to have other people read it in general, aside from just the blank page. And I was lucky enough, only, I think, 3 or 4 months into my process of pitching to agents, I was lucky enough to have somebody who was interested. And I was lucky enough to have him, because he was and is a very editorial agent. He does a lot of the editorial with his authors before pitching them to publishers. And so I think that was probably about another year with him of editing. And halfway through that year, he suggested that I take the story and turn it from prose into poetry, into verse. So cut out all of the really key scenes and string those together. And it took a lot of convincing, but I quickly saw that that was where the gold of my story was going to come out and actually shine through. It went from 600 pages of kind of more self-indulgent and self-serving prose to 250 pages of poetry that I hope tells a story that a lot of people can relate to in one way or another, even though it is a very strange story. So, yep.
Thank you, Emily. Next up, we have Patrina.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So my name is Patrina Dixon, and I am a personal finance expert. I guess I will say that my journey of becoming an author didn't start with I wanted to be an author. It didn't start with I used to be a teacher. It started with my money was jacked up. I didn't have any saved. And when I started to become a steward of how to do things differently with my money, I wanted to share that newfound skill, if you will, with everybody. And when I started to think about how I do that, I thought about, what if I knew this when I was younger? So I started to do some research on is financial literacy being taught consistently in schools? And I learned that it was not. And I knew if I knew what I know now then I would be in a much better place with my money. So my mission was and I love this quote, when you make an observation, you have an obligation. So I observed that it was not being done consistently in schools. So I then sought out to find a way to make the message of financial literacy, the importance of the desire to want to know it better by way of a book. So my first book, which is the first part in a 3-part series, is called It's My Money. So in addition to being an author, this book led me to be a speaker. I'm also an international speaker where I've gone as far as Trinidad and Tobago, teaching financial concepts to young folks. And when I say young folks, it's teenagers. So this volume, hopefully you can see it here, this is for 13 to 18. So I've gone, like I said, across the world in high schools, to teach young people about financial concepts, saving, budgeting, how to write a check, what's a savings account, why it's important, the difference between a bank and a credit union. So when I wrote my first book, I thought about it being a one in a 3-part series. So this one, 13 to 18, the one behind me, 18 to 24, and then another one after the fact. And I thought it would come out year after year after year. So this one, 2016, then 2017, and then 2018 was my goal. It's 2020 and the second one isn't out yet. The reason being is a great problem to have, is because everybody wanted me to come out and talk about it. Because the folks that I was teaching was very, very, very appreciative of somebody teaching them how to do this. And it wasn't about not knowing, it was never being taught. So a lot of the students that I went out to teach, some of them didn't have a lot of money. Some of them come from a lot of money, but still was never taught because they always had money. So a lot of people wanted to know how to do it. So I was hired by schools, organizations, and then again, going all across the country teaching this. So that's my first book is called It's My Money, a guided journal to manage your finances. And the term It's My Money became so catchy to I had to trademark it. So I own It's My Money in the financial literacy space. So my financial workshops and my books, programs, everything in the financial space is, when used the way that it's written here, I own it. That was very important to me, that nobody else could use it, because it became very catchy. So the reason why it's my money, it's because it is. It's your money. You want to treat it right. You want to make sure that you're not paying fees you don't have to. You want to learn how to grow it. You want to learn how to earn more. So that is what sort of inspired me. The fact that people didn't know, the fact that I didn't. If I thought about when I learned about it, if I learned about it earlier, where would I be now with my money? That's what started the first book. So my process was write the book, make it a very easy and quick to read, it's a guided journal to help you manage your finances. So it's written in journal format, meaning that there's a chapter for each topic: saving, budgeting, banking, etc. It has line pages for journaling. It has action steps to reinforce the reading, inspirational quotes throughout, and a glossary in back. So again, oftentimes I would go out and talk about the content of the book, and then the book is left behind to sustain the message that I bring forth in when I go and talk to students. I also had an editor for the book. So somebody to, again, because I didn't wake up one day and say I wanted to be an author. So writing grammatically correct is probably not one of my best fortes. So then I had to have an editor. So I worked with an editor to ensure that it was grammatically correct. And then I also had somebody format it, because remember, it's a journal. It has action steps in it. So there's lines for that. And then the glossary in the back. And then once that was done, I self-published. So for me, I wanted to be sure that how I wanted to tell the story, who I wanted to tell the story with, was what I had control over. So that's my choice for self-publishing. Now, would I ever go the traditional route of an agent? Maybe, I don't know. That hasn't been my situation to date, but I did self-publish successfully. Then I go out, and then the book was made available, not just on Amazon, but on my website as well. It's sold in many bookstores across the country, a lot of them indie bookstores, but not all. And the one thing that I didn't do as it pertains to my book and getting the message out there was great with marketing. So I'm glad that the message was received, because I had no dollars for marketing. I spent money on the cover, the editor, the book cover, the editor, and getting it published and all that great stuff. But I'm like, okay, it's on Amazon, everybody's gonna buy it. No, that's not how it works. So I then had to figure out how to get the message out there. So I then joined various different groups. And like I said, I literally got in my car and drove around to many different indie bookstores and things of that nature. And then I became a better steward of the marketing aspect of getting my book out there. So again, very easy read for students, designed for 13 to 18-year-olds in mind. And I'm often asked this question when I say that, like, is it saving and budgeting the same no matter how old you are? Absolutely. So if you've never saved, budgeted, know the difference between bank, credit union, how to write a check, could you learn from this? Absolutely. But I always tell that it's written for 13 to 18-year-olds because of the way that I talk about the topics and how I try to engage the reader in the way that this one is written. Now, the one behind me that's due to come out soon, again, will be self-published. I get a little bit more granular in this one, and then the topics I expanded on the topics relative to finances aligned to folks 19 to 25. So more to come on that. So that's my story, why I did it, who I did it for. Again, I believe the topic of my book was a solution to what a lot of folks needed. So that is the reason why volume 2 didn't happen, because I went on a tour of just going across, sharing it with everyone. More for people wanted me to speak about the topic, but then would purchase the book as the leave behind for the sustainability of the message and the techniques that are taught in the book. So I'm here for questions. Again, my name is Patrina Dixon. The name of my book is called It's My Money, a guided journal to help you manage your finances. You can put it in your cart on Amazon, but it's also found on my website, which is itsmymoneyjournal.info. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrina. Next up, we have Maria.
Hello, everyone, and thank you again, the Simsbury Library, for the opportunity. I'm Maria Souza Hogan. I am originally from Brazil. I have been in the United States for over 30 years. I came as an au pair, a live-in babysitter, taking care of 2 children in Arlington, Virginia. When my visa expired, I went back to Brazil and I taught Portuguese to speakers of other languages. And one of my students was an American who became my fiancé. And I wanted to come back to the United States to go to graduate school. So Paul paid for my schooling, and I received a master's degree in English from St. Cloud State University in Minnesota, and got married to Paul. And unfortunately, he was in an accident and left me with a 2-year-old, Paul Michael Hogan II. After I raised Paul, I wanted to go back to graduate school. So I went to the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and earned a PhD in Spanish American literature. I live in West Hartford. I teach Spanish at Litchfield High School. Club of Stars, A Symbol of Survival, is my first book. It's a memoir. And the title of the book, Club of Stars, is connected to the text in 2 ways. The title, Club of Stars, is connected to a song that I heard as a child my sisters sing. They reminisced about the older neighborhood where they lived, and they were able to go to school and have a better life. And because of my father's irresponsibility, they moved to the outskirts of the town where there were no good schools and a very hard life. My father died and left my mother with 10 children to raise without any resource, not even food to eat the day that they took my father away. So my mother was left with those 10 children to raise, and she only had a 2nd grade education. She was barely 4 feet tall, got married at 14, and had 14 children. So the first part of the book portrays the life in this small town, and what I call a samba of survival. Samba is the Brazilian dance, the survival that we, the family, had to go through to go through these struggles that we encountered. So my mother stayed in this small town by the name of Castro Alves in the interior of the state of Bahia. Bahia is in the northeast part of Brazil. And over there, she begged the townspeople for food, for money to feed the family. My siblings had to resort to stealing the neighbor's chicken to survive, stealing from the vendors on the market on Saturdays, stealing the voodoo offerings on the crossroads. At midnight, one sister slept with the town priests for some money to feed the family. After my siblings grew up, my mother could no longer stay in this small town, so she decided to leave, looking for a better life in the capital of the state of Bahia, called Salvador, and left. But in Salvador, the family ended up in a favela, which is a slum. And life was much harder in the slum. There were no services, no electricity, no running water, no sewage, no food, no place to go. It was like between a rock and a hard place. Behind the slum was the Atlantic Ocean. In the front of the slum was a very dangerous highway. And the highway works more like a social metaphor, symbolizing the barriers that I had to encounter to acquire, to have an education. So I had to cross the highway to the other side of the road where the well-to-do families lived. And I began tutoring them. I got a scholarship from a school that opened up on the other side of the road and in the good neighborhood. And I started tutoring. Sometimes I tutored the well-to-do families, the children hungry. And so little by little, I borrowed books to study because I didn't have any books. I didn't have money for transportation. I didn't really have anything. So I went throughout my career in Brazil. I had to borrow books. I had to walk hungry. I had to teach hungry. But I did acquire an education over there. I earned a bachelor's degree, and that's how I was able to come to the United States to work as a nanny. And that's basically the whole story of the book. And I wouldn't call it a memoir. It's more like a collective memory. I describe my family's struggle, my struggle, and the struggle of that community in the favelas and in this small town. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Next up, we have Karina.
Hello, welcome, and thanks to the Simsbury Library for having me. I'm Karina Lawson. I have a degree in journalism from Boston University, and I worked as a weekly and then daily newspaper reporter for 7 years in New Jersey. Then I went on to manage Barnes & Noble when they were expanding. And after that, I became a mom with 4 kids and started to seriously consider writing as a career. So it was something I could do to my own schedule. So I got into it like a couple of other people rather late in my 40s. I have a nonfiction book co-authored from Crown Publishing called Geek Mom, Projects, Tips, and Adventures for Moms and Their 21st Century Families, that draws on my journalism background and was inspired by a site that I co-founded that you can still find online, Geek Mom. I have 10 fiction books out of sort of varying genre. You can see a couple of them behind me, steampunk, paranormal romance, alternate history. And right now I am working on an historical urban fantasy. So I guess you could say I like to mash up my genres. That's probably from when I think we tend to like to write the same kind of things that we loved as a kid. And so I always tended to mash up my genres back then. The steampunk comes from my love of Sherlock Holmes. The paranormal romance. I know a lot of paranormal romance is vampires and werewolves and all that kind of stuff, but I loved superheroes growing up. And so my paranormal romances are based on heroes and heroines who have a different type of psychic ability and superpower. I would guess my process is a little bit all over the place. I know a lot of writers use Scrivener or some other programs to plot out their books, but I tend to basically just have an idea and keep going until I'm stuck. And I usually end up with about a 40,000 word synopsis or summary of where I want to go. And then I have to remind myself when I get frustrated that this is my process and I finished every book that I'd wanted to finish. So I have to go back and do some things to figure out where I went and what my subconscious was trying to tell me. I have written a few comic scripts for a couple of indies. And that was very interesting because that imposes structure panel by panel. And right now I'm just finishing up what they call a visual novel for a division of Ubisoft, which was fascinating because they gave me a story Bible and a synopsis, and I had to come out with a scene by scene outline, 3 acts, 5 chapters per act, 5 scenes per chapter. So I think it was something like 65 scenes. And I had to plot it all out to get the story structure in that. And that was really interesting. I suspect it's a lot like game writing or screenwriting, and I'm just finishing that up now. So that was a lot of fun for me. It was kind of mind expanding. I guess you would say my favorite kind of fictional story, though, is found families. And the steampunk is about a Jewish seamstress who's sort of my Watson, who has to go to a consulting detective in her sort of magical Victorian world to help solve a murder. And my paranormals are about well, we all have to have an underground complex, don't we? When we have superheroes, we have to have a headquarters. So they're learning how to best use their powers to save the world. Right now, I'm just glad that I had the time to write, and glad that everything is mainly worked out. If anyone has any questions about traditional publishing versus smaller publishing versus publishing on Amazon, I've sort of done all that. Most of my books were the fictional books were with a publisher called Samhain, who was doing very well in the romance field, but eventually folded. So I had to take my own books and republish them on Kindle and in other places. And then, of course, the fictional book was from traditional publishing. So I've been all over the place. And, if anyone has any questions, and I've really enjoyed hearing all your stories. I'm fascinated. I have questions for all of you.
Thank you,
That's me.
I don't want to cut you off. I'm so sorry. Did you have anything else?
No, that's
to
all right.
add?
I was just going to say you could reach me on Facebook. Look for Karina Lawson with 2 R's, or on Twitter, again, Karina Lawson, or if you Google me, I'm probably the first result that comes up, and you can find my website.
Great. You can also share that in the chat if you'd like. You should have that capability. All right. Next up, we have Jonathan.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. Thanks for organizing this event. It's a great distraction amidst the chaos that's going on outside in the real world right now. And I appreciate anything that allows us to deflect our thoughts. you've assembled a really amazing eclectic spectrum of authors here. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it looks like everybody is on a different kind of avenue of life in terms of how they're organizing their writing and how their story has come out. Karina sounds like she's her own spectrum herself, eclectic within herself. So it sounds like a great group of people you've organized. Did you do this intentionally, Lindsay?
It was a very happy accident. So, and that will be one of the questions we can kind of talk about after with everyone's backgrounds, but the stage is yours.
Well, it's great that you organize this, so thank you. So I'm a family physician who's been writing for probably 30 years now. I'm working on my 7th novel. I guess you'd call me a traditional literary fiction person. I intended to become a writer in college, but faced the inevitable decision with whether I'm going to make a living or be poor for the rest of my life, and so I had to give up being an English major for pre-med, and discontinued writing for the next 20 years while I was immersed in medical esoterica, and picked up writing, I guess, as a means of distracting myself, a bit of just unwinding, and a bit of just trying to work through the issues I faced. So the one thing that becoming a physician did was it gave me like an incredible a well of topics to discuss and to work through. And that's much of what my fiction has been along the way. I wrote my 2nd novel about trying to fictionalize a variety of patients I had. It was called Displaced Persons, and did not publish that. Got an agent who pushed it out to a variety of publishers, and they all had wonderful things to say about it, except for the fact that it was not marketable. And that's somewhat maybe the story of my career, which is that I've picked maybe somewhat depressing or difficult topics to work through. It sounds like a bit like Rick has gone through very difficult topics in his work, and very similarly, my topics are not exactly easy to work through. But I've self-published 2 novels, my 4th and 5th. My 6th is I'm still trying to get published by traditional publishers. But the 4th one was called Displaced Persons, or is still called Displaced Persons. It's looking backwards on the video, but it was about a physician who makes an error in taking care of a patient and becomes pretty depressed secondary to that, and becomes immersed in a story of a displaced person who had been a patient of his, and during World War II he had been a displaced person in a displaced persons camp, and came to the United States and gets immersed in those 2 conflicts. And the 2 stories kind of juxtaposed, with the physician being kind of displaced from his own life because of his own errors in judgment, and trying to reconcile that with a more global kind of displacement that was going on with this other patient. My more recent novel was called The Untold Tragedies of Ethan Morton, which is about a teen suicide, and about an interest I had in suicide in general from when I was in college, and I was a suicide prevention counselor. And this was based on a real patient who had committed a horrific suicide at age 18, that left his family and his acquaintances and his loved ones at a loss. And my conceit in that was to trying to work through what possibly could have motivated such a horrific suicide by working through a discussion with his teacher, his professor, his prior people who had known him at college, his physician at home, and a physician in the emergency room. So they kind of interview a variety of people who are in his life to try and figure out why he would have committed such a horrific crime, a horrific act. And it juxtaposes that somewhat with what happens with climate change in this country and in the world with the problems we all have with self-destruction that's going on unknowingly. So it's a bit of a complex story, but I think really has a message for our time. And so in my process, I mean, I guess, I either have something that's been percolating for a long time, which is my interest in suicide, or something that kind of gets inspired at the moment that will set off my inspiration for a novel. So the interest in teen suicide, I think, had been percolating for many years. My most recent novel was shortlisted for three actually awards that I'm deciding whether to publish or not on my own or wait for a traditional publisher. But that story came out of a visit I had to Prague a few years ago with visiting the Jewish quarter there, and a docent described the synagogue there as being the potential site for Hitler's idea that he had to make a museum of an extinct race, a museum of Judaism, after he exterminated the religion. So on that docent tour, led by a person who had just discovered her own Jewish roots, I kind of was given this gift of a museum of an extinct race, which inspired me to write my last novel about imagining what would happen if that were really to have come true. And again, that's a pretty dark theme, but turns out I've become a dark person. In any case, I continue to write, and I'm semi-retired now and have more time, but managed to write those 6 novels while I was still practicing full time. So I appreciate your time and interest, and you can find me on
Jonathan, I'm sorry for interrupting, but you're freezing up, so you may want to use the chat.
Tragedy of Ethan Frome, more history, the books for my process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. You did freeze at the end a little bit, so if you want to put your information in the chat, that way other people can get in touch with you. But at the end, you did freeze just a moment.
I'm sorry. This is the novel on Amazon, The Untold Tragedies of Ethan Morton. Sorry I missed that.
It's okay. Certainly just share it in the chat. So last but certainly not least, we have Mary.
Hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here. Thank you, Simsbury Library and Lindsay. I am speaker and author Mary Kay Savarese. My award-winning adult novel is a mystery romance with a spiritual twist titled Tiger's Love, Bubble Bats, and Obsession Perfume. Who knew? Now, I'm sure you're wondering why such a title, and so did my publisher. He had asked me, where does this come in as a mystery, and the tiger with the bubbles. So I would love to let you know how the title was born. Several years ago, I visited a big cat wild reserve in St. Augustine, Florida. And last on the tour, we came to a galvanized tank, 16 feet wide, 4 feet high, that was overflowing with bubbles. I stood there and wondered where this was going. and outmarched a gorgeous 600-pound Siberian tiger who slipped into this vat of bubbles and looked as though he was ready for a cocktail. And sure enough, the wildlife handler sprayed Obsession perfume on his tongue and he lapped it up. Well, I stood there in awe and I said, that is the title of my next novel. And so Tigers Love Bubble Bats and Obsession Perfume was born. And what the title is a metaphor for starting over, because this reserve was considered an old folks' home for older cats, panthers and lions and tigers. And as my protagonist, Angie Pantera, is dealing with her loss and betrayal after 25 years of marriage, she is also reinventing her life. So this title became a metaphor. And through this mystery, I'll lead you on a journey of murders, intrigue, inspiration, and hopefully you'll also be able to reinvent yourself through my story. Tigers Love Bubble Bats and Obsession Perfume, who knew? I am traditionally published. You can find me in any bookstore, on Amazon, and I'd love for you to visit my website, and I'd love to chat with you, and that is www.maryksavarese.com. And I look forward to the following year. I do have a trilogy that will begin publishing one a year. And I thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to speak with you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mary. Okay, I'm going to get us back to everyone. Oh, all right, can everyone see all the authors again? I had everyone spotlighted before. All right. So before we invite all the audience members to sort of put in their questions, I want to thank everyone again for joining us. I loved hearing everyone's very unique background to their writing journey. It was a very happy accident that we gathered all of you from the various unique journeys. So I just enjoyed hearing everyone. As we wait for more questions, I thought I could start off with a nice, fun, quick one for everyone. It will apply to everyone. And the question is, what is your most unusual writing quirk? What's something very quirky about your own writing process that you'd like to share with the audience? Anyone can sort of jump right in.
Oh, I don't know how quirky this is. It's probably old fashioned. I actually will write first drafts out longhand.
Wow.
Yeah, my whole first novel was written longhand when the twins long ago were at swim lessons. So.
Was that before laptops?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Any other quirks you'd like to share?
I'll share mine.
This is Patrine.
Oh, hi. I retype my second draft. So, in general, I would say I write about 12 drafts per book. And my second draft, I print out the first draft, put it on the, on the table next to me, and then I retype the entire manuscript. And what I find is I tighten probably by about 15 or 20,000 words. I eliminate a lot of junk. Sometimes I kill characters that way, and sometimes I just, get a whole fresh chapter added in. But I find it really helps me get to the next draft. But I think a lot of people think that is overkill and kind of ridiculous.
Trina?
Yes. So I don't know if this is quirky either. So usually editors want you to send over your entire manuscript before they begin the editing process. I do mine chapter by chapter. So I know my editor thinks that's quirky, but for me, especially given what I write about, things change in the world and regarding how I want to talk about the information based on me going, well, even now, because I do a lot of my workshops via Zoom. So what I learn, what I think I want to talk about on that topic for a particular audience, it changes. So the book has to hurry up and come out because I keep going like, oh, they need to know this, they need to know that. So it starts to change. So the arrangement I have with her is that I can send chapter by chapter. So we finish it that way versus the entire manuscript and then needing to doing it that way. So that I think is a bit different than how most editors take it in.
Well, Mary?
I love to begin with the quirky title, as you could see by the title of my novel. And then I love to write the story around that title.
That's interesting.
Great. Anything else before we
Yeah.
move on to the next question?
I got one.
Sure, go.
So I do a lot of bike riding. So when I'm out cranking away, sometimes an idea will pop into my head and I might be 3 or 4 miles away and I have to come back home and write it down. Because I'm listening to music. I don't have anything, I could probably stop and dictate into my phone, but for whatever reason, I got to come back, sit down on the computer in my, my soaking wet workout stuff. And then I have to write it. And then I'm back out on the bike. So the bike gives me a lot of interesting ideas. So
Does that happen a lot?
Yeah,
too often. Actually.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I have to agree with Rick. I mean, writing is a evolutionary process. I don't think you have to be sitting at your laptop to be writing. First of all, I could not possibly write longhand anything. I can't read my handwriting 2 minutes after I've written it. So if it weren't for computers, I would never have written a word. But yeah, I'll often be thinking in my head while I'm driving to work. I often don't have time to write, so that I'll be writing at midnight or 2 a.m. When I'm done with seeing patients. But if I'm driving to work or if I'm sitting in a concert, I kind of work through the details. You don't necessarily write the words, but you work through the process, the scene or the characters or how they're feeling when you're not necessarily at the keyboard. So I think that it's really an evolutionary kind of thing where you're not necessarily typing out words, but you're thinking about the whole process.
Great, thank you. So that actually gave us enough time. We did get a question from the audience. They are wondering, can anyone share their experience with traditional versus small press publishing? They are a writer themselves. Anyone want to go first? Sure, Emily.
With traditional publishing, I think if you're going to go the route of traditional publishing, you are going to want an agent in your corner. From everything that I had read when I started in on the journey of trying to get a story published, pointed me in the direction of either decide that you're going to self-publish and do that or get an agent. And so I got an agent. That's kind of like the first step. And then through my agent, it was a process, but it ended up connecting me with Andrews McMeel, who is the publisher for my book. And I would say I'm very new to all of this still, but in my experience with Andrews McMeel, you're going to want to be ready to really market your own book, even if you do go with a traditional publisher, because a traditional publisher can only do so much, and that what they can do can only go so far when you compare it to the actual enthusiasm and go-gettership of a writer who really believes in their work. So it was great to have all the experts who were there to do the editing and to talk with, their representatives from Barnes and Noble and Amazon and whatnot, and to help me design the cover and to have a plan for marketing. But I would say that the thing that I really didn't expect, if you do go the traditional publishing route, is what comes after the actual publication date.
Great, thank you. Karina?
I would like to second what Emily had said about a traditional publisher is great in that they will provide really high level professional editing and covers, and they know what they're doing. But marketing is something, in a lot of ways, a lot of the independent authors that I know, at least in the romance genre, know more about how to market what they have than the traditional romance publishers. It was just easier for them to learn, and it's hard for a big corporation to sort of turn the ship around. It's sort of like the Titanic. We've always done things this way, and you try to change the rudder, and it just doesn't move that fast. A lot of the traditional publishers will leave a great deal of marketing to yourself. And that's still, I think, the toughest piece that you have control over, but you don't. The signal to noise ratio and getting people to look at your books is difficult, even with a traditional contract. So there are some smaller publishers, niche publishers. I have a friend who writes cozies, and her small publisher has a newsletter list of, a couple 100,000, and she's able to make a living selling and marketing to that list that her publisher has. So sometimes you may do better with these small niche publishers, depending on your genre, than you will do with the larger publishers, if that helps.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I'll just add, I agree. I don't think you can publish traditionally without an agent. I don't even think that's possible if it's a big 5 company or a bigger company. And I think you can with some of the smaller companies. So that's just something to think about. But I think it also depends. Like I publish Kidlit, and so even the difference between YA and middle grade, my YA books are going in there's a different way to sell YA because you're not selling to teachers necessarily. But now that I have a middle grade book, the publishing company goes into the school and library market, and then they're really trying to sell hard at the school and library market. So I think it really helps to have that muscle behind you when you're trying to get into those markets and have schools and libraries buy your book in bulk. But I think that the answer is, it really depends on what you're looking for as an author. Do you have a book that means a lot to you and you're just trying to share it with as many people as you can, but you don't want to spend the time to really hone the query letter and chase an agent and find an agent and then have the agent sell the book for you? I guess it depends on what you really are looking for as an author. And once you know that, then you can decide in what direction to go. But no matter what, I think it's always a challenge, and you just have to be ready to be resilient and market yourself. Absolutely.
Thank you. That was great advice, everyone. We did get another question in the chat during that time. They started with, the inventor Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. What percentages categorize your writing? Who wants to go first?
I'll start.
Okay, go ahead.
I haven't had any, like I said, I've written 4 books in 2 years. So in terms of the inspiration part, I've had a lot of ideas. But I would find myself working at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. This was back when I was teaching. Work for 2 hours, go to school, stay after school when all the kids were gone, stay till 6:30 at night, 7 o'clock at night with the lights closed in my classroom and just cranking away. And what I found was that perspiration, let's say 85 to 90% of what I was doing, I felt like, I don't know that I would still be writing if I didn't do that first year worth of writing that first book. And, but since then, I think I said before, I have a hard time stopping now. And so that's a good thing, I guess, to have those ideas readily available. But yeah, it's just, I find myself in very strange times writing. I'm up in bed and I'll jump out of bed and come downstairs and I'll work on it for an hour or two. And my neck is stiff when I go back to bed because it's, you sit over the computer. But I think that's the kind of thing you have to do. You just have to, belt it out. And as I forget who said, was it Carrie? You said how many drafts that you would normally write?
I'd say about 12.
Yeah. As I've gotten better, I think I've gotten better as I've written more. And as I've written more, I find that I need to do more and more draft work. I think my first book had maybe 2 or 3 drafts. It was raw. It came out that way. I think it was a good story, but it's not like the last one that came out. My book, Lovely Rita, that I started that in February, and I must have done, I would say 10 or 12 drafts. Yeah. So the perspirations, you got to do that if you really want to improve your craft, so yeah.
Can I just add something? I don't want to dominate the conversation, but you just reminded me of something. So one of the things with traditional publishing is if you write a book and you go through the whole process of selling the book, that book's not going to hit the shelves for about 2 years, maybe 1.5, but no more, no fewer than 1.5, unless you're have some political news you want to put out, and they jump on it. So if you really want to share your book with the world and you want to do it traditionally, you're talking at least a couple of years before that book's going to actually be on the bookshelves. So that's another factor to be thinking about. You were saying you wrote it and then I don't know how long it took you to get the book out, but.
When you do it, when you self-publish, Amazon gives you that, the opportunity to do it quickly. But that's a question I think that I would just throw out to everybody else. When you get a situation where if you self-publish, has anybody found that you can self-publish and then a publishing house or an agent will pick you up afterwards? Does that happen to anybody?
That's a good question, Rick. We're just gonna shoot over to Mary. I think
I heard it happen. I did hear it does happen, but it's quite rare that it does happen. And by the point you've become, you've self-published and you've possibly become a best-selling self-published author, you don't need them. You are making the money. So that's a good thing. It actually is, but maybe the book after that. I also wanted to add, we are authors because it is part of our soul, but to write. But the other thing we deal with is we have to persevere, because part of our writing is we're always dealing with rejection. And you just believe in yourself and you stick with it, and it'll happen. I mean, it took me 10 years before my first novel was traditionally published.
Wow.
Thank you. Anyone else in that particular question versus inspiration versus perspiration?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that it's not, I think you have to really enjoy the process and love the process. If it's a grind, if it feels like, you're sitting there at the desk and scratching your head and throwing peanuts against the wall, it's going to drive you a little bit nuts. So I think you have to enjoy, the process of writing in itself without the rewards. Otherwise, it's so solitary and it's so, individualistic that I think you're going to get very frustrated. So when I write or when I edit, it's a reward of itself. I think that there's so many distractions now. It's more difficult to just sit down there without looking at your emails, without looking at Facebook, without looking at all the Twitter tweets, just to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write now. Once you get into it, I think it's very much an enjoyable process, but there's so much out there to stop you from doing it that I think it can be a difficult hurdle to overcome. So you have to really discipline yourself and say, this is something I really want to do.
Yeah, and this is Patrina. I'll add too. I think you said it, Jonathan. You have to, in addition to enjoying the process, enjoying what you're writing about. Like I love talking about financial literacy. I love telling people, teaching people how to make better choices with their money. And like, I love the quote, when you know better, you do better. So I feel like my writing is helping somebody to know better so that they can do better. So that's what fuels my fire. That gives me, I think Rick said, in the middle of the night, I'm like, oh, let me put this in there. Let me put that in there. And I also am a blogger. So I'm constantly sharing the information on the topics in different ways. So again, for me, I enjoy what I'm writing about. I enjoy the fact that when somebody picks up my book or buy my, down, however they get my book through, somebody buying a bulk of them and passing them out, that they're reading something where they can learn and actually put their practical steps in there that they can execute upon. That drives me to want to tell them more about the topics that are in the book. So that's the driving factor for me. And then what happened for me that I talked about earlier was when the book came out, and I don't know if this was my question to some of those of you on here, other authors. I then was requested to speak about the topics. So then I transformed, because I was the writer before I was the speaker. So then it was like, okay, this is an award-winning author, because my book did win an award, a children's award. And then it was, okay, can you come and talk about money? And then it's the book. So I kind of like flipped roles, which sort of delayed the process on the second. So I think it's all about, to Jonathan's point, loving it. And then, your why, like why you're doing it. Are you writing to write? Are you writing to help somebody? Are you writing to tell the story? Is it a help book? I think though the various different genres determines what then happens next, from what you put in it, and then how you stay within it.
Great. I think we had Emily and then Karina.
I just wanted to add that what everyone else said, you have to really love what you're doing, because the only thing you can control is the work. After a while, everything else is out. You can't, to some extent, you can control the other elements, but when you're most in control is when you're writing the story down. And if you're not enjoying that, then, if you're not having fun with that, why would you do that? Why would you put yourself? Writing a book is hard. I would say that I know a lot of authors, because I've been a member of several author groups, national organizations, and I've seen so many people just stop. Great ideas. They'll finish 3 chapters, and I'll be like, oh, this is so awesome, finish. And they don't. So more important, I think, than a great idea is an ability to put that idea on paper and refine it.
Great, thank you. Emily, did you have something to add before? I think I had seen your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that quote and those percentages are very interesting to me as a writer to think about, given that when I look back on my journey to becoming an author, a published author, I don't think it would have happened if it weren't for something that happened to me in my life. When I started to have this relationship with this person, and then years went by, and then got to a point kind of in society and in our world where topics of gender and sexuality were, all over the place. And I kind of had a voice that could tell a story that I didn't hear very often or at all in that realm. So I don't really know exactly what my final conclusion is on 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, but I think similarly to what everybody else is saying, when you are a writer, you kind of like, you don't have a choice. You have to put things down. You have to always be looking around in your everyday experience and seeing things as potential ways to illuminate an idea. But yeah, I think just personally answering the question, in my case, it was, the inspiration was much more than 1%.
Great, thank you. During the, we have a lot more questions in the chat, so we have about another 15 minutes of the program, so I'm going to try to get maybe through 2 more questions. Bill asked, do you ever experience writer's block? How do you get past it? Do you find it depressing? Any one of those, if anyone wants to jump on those. General writer's block question. Sure, go ahead, Mary.
I find the best thing that works for me is to write down just start with the sentence. And then I find all of a sudden that sentence can become 2 sentences and 3 sentences, and I end up with a paragraph and my juices start flowing. That is the best way that it'll work for me. Sit down at your laptop or in front of your writing pad and just let it go and start that way. And I think that's always been a big help for me.
Anyone else want to touch on? Go ahead, Carrie.
So I'm experiencing it right now. I just feel like, I don't know about other authors, but the state of the world is just so heavy right now that I'm finding my brain is not feeling creative. And I have a deadline. I have a second book that I'm supposed to be doing for this deal, but I find I just have learned to say to myself, so you can't write a book. It's not the end of the world. You'll be able to do it eventually. And then I kind of give myself some space. And then eventually I sit down with a giant pile of books, and it's just sometimes I choose random books. Sometimes I choose specifically books related to the kind of book I'm writing. And I just read and read and read and read. And ultimately other voices, I internalize other people's voices, and that unstick something eventually. And then I always keep a notebook. So I'm writing a word I like, or a sentence I like, or, just an image that resonates with me. And over time, I eventually get to a place where I'm able to start writing. But if you are feeling writer's block, I definitely encourage you to first not make it worse by putting pressure on yourself, even if you have a deadline, because it doesn't make it any easier, it doesn't make it better. And eventually, when the story is ready to come out, the story kind of shows itself.
Yeah, I think if you're feeling like you're supposed to write, quote unquote, supposed, it makes it very difficult. If you're writing about something you really care about, then it becomes much more easy, and you have to really want to express a certain story. So that my sense is that it unblocks you if you know that you're that this means something to you. I think what happens in the middle of writing, having gone through the idea that this is really something I want to write about, is that you just have trouble getting the words the way you want them to work. And if you start to wordsmith at the beginning, I think you're really in trouble. I think you really want to get it down, and you can always wordsmith afterwards. If you make each word important at the beginning of your writing, then you're really hindering yourself. So later on, you can always change the words and rearrange, and word processing makes it so much easier. But most of the time when I'm writing, I have a good sense of where I'm starting, and I may have a good sense of where I'm ending, but I really don't know how I'm going to get from beginning to end. And that's what really kind of the process of working through becomes. And most of the time, it's really a binary choice for me. At each scene, at each moment, I'm saying, well, what are the 2 things this character could do in this situation? And if I have just 2 choices, then I'll make it 1 and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, I'll change it around. But each scene becomes then its own process that helps me move it along. Sorry. So that's my process.
Thank you, Emily. And then Maria.
Yeah, this might sound like a complete nightmare of a piece of advice to some people, but it has worked for me in those moments where I'm kind of like I'm at my computer or piece of paper and I'm in the middle of it and it just doesn't seem to be working, or I just don't feel like my brain is really focused on whatever I'm trying to say or do in my piece of writing, is to kind of not step away and do something else, stay in the writing mindset, but try to take a piece of like an actual formal rule set for writing. So what I do is I say, okay, I'm just going to try and write a haiku right now. I'm just going to like refocus onto a different subject topic and try to do 5-7-5 syllables and write a little haiku. Or maybe if you do know poetry and you like poetry, I'm going to write a sonnet, 14 lines with this kind of rhyme scheme. And it almost becomes like a little like Sudoku, but with words for your brain to just kind of, have a very specific start and finish. And this is what I'm going to do. And it, for me, has helped to kind of shake things up inside and reset. Or at least if it ends up being a halfway decent poem, then I have that to look at.
That's cool.
Great, thank you. Maria?
Yes, for me, it was a very difficult process to write my memoir because I had many memories that have lodged into my brain and soul. So I had to take many breaks, and it took me 10 years to write the book. And when it hurt, I had to stop. I had to read, I had to garden, take a walk, talk to friends, take a ride, just get into my car and drive, and also cry because it becomes very personal and you relive those memories. And you kind of, it was a process for me in which I repossessed myself. I had found that I was fragmented in many ways. And by writing that story, I tried to put those pieces together to make myself whole again. So it was like a catharsis and a difficult one. But in the end, I felt really good about writing it because it's documented. That's the very important part. So a person can read the book and say, well, I learned about that stage, that city or that division in Brazil, about that culture, about that history, about those stories that are told.
Great, thank you. Karina, and as everyone's, I'm going to do one sort of wrap up after Karina speaks, but if anyone wants to put in their social media handles in or any contact information in the chat for the audience members, please do so. But Karina, the floor is yours. You're muted. You're muted.
A lot of writer's block is possibly due to fear. Oh, what if it's not good enough? What if no one ever wants to read it? What if I put myself out there? And it's a very sort of naked thing, especially when you're writing something personal. And writing is very personal, whatever kind of writing that you're doing. I generally don't get that because of my experience as a newspaper reporter, because if you tell me I have a deadline, my brain is trained to write towards a deadline. So I find them very inspirational, especially when, you get paid. It's much harder, I think, when you're sort of unpublished and you're not sure where you're going and you're not sure if you're going to find someone and then who will love your work as you do. It's easy to talk yourself out of doing it. And then the other reason I think you get writer's block is sometimes you don't know enough about the construction of a story. And so you get stuck. I'm like, what should happen next? Where should I go? And I think for that, the easiest thing for me to do, because I learned by doing, is to grab a favorite book and see what they did at that point in the story. Although there are a lot of writing advice books and all that, but for me, it was like, how did they do that? Because I really loved it when they did that. And then you sort of not steal their idea, but steal what happens. And I think those are probably the two biggest contributors to writer's block that people talk about.
Mary, did you have something to contribute? I saw your hand up.
Oh, no, I'm all set. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
So as we're drawing to a close, I apologize we couldn't get to all the questions this evening, but it seems we have some writers in the audience. Does anyone have sort of last, parting advice to authors out there that you wish you knew when you started this journey? Go ahead. Mary.
Don't give up. Believe in yourself and keep plugging away. It'll happen.
Good advice.
Katrina, I think you're muted, just so you know.
Thank you. Don't wait to be perfect. My first book is definitely different than my second book. So you want to have an editor. You don't want like anything out there, but in all we do, we continue to evolve. So if in order for you to know how well it's doing, it has to get out there. So I would say ensure that you are getting your message across. It's edited and has, good English in it and all. But in order for you to improve upon something, you have to have something for that to happen. So that's all I'll say. Oh, and I do have one other quick comment. I'm sorry.
Sure,
I know we
go
coming up
ahead.
against time.
No.
I think for me, as I listen to others, again, I self-publish. I've never gone the other route. And I mentioned I wanted book 2 out in 2017, book 3 out in 2018, and it's 2020. I think for me, because I was self-publishing, I didn't have a deadline. I had a deadline in my mind and it didn't happen because life continued to happen. So that sort of took that anxiety off that I need to have it by this date or this will happen. So again, as you think about the two routes, you have a little bit more autonomy on everything when you self-publish. So I'll just throw that comment in there as well.
Thank you. Any last thoughts from everyone else? Sure, go ahead, Carrie. You're muted.
I would say absolutely don't give up, but sometimes give up when it comes to being too attached to a particular manuscript. I've seen writers who have that one book and they keep working on it for years and years and years, and sometimes that book is not the one. So I recommend maybe, stick it in a drawer and start something new. And sometimes I will poach characters from one of my manuscripts in a drawer for a different manuscript, but don't feel like you have to have that one book and that's it. I wrote 2 books that never saw the light of day before I got my first one published. And I think I've written, even with 2 traditional publishers, my editors often reject full manuscripts. I wrote two books in the past year and those were both, rejected. So now I wrote it. So, just understand that rejection happens. It's perfectly normal and not every book is going to work. And it just, every time you write something, it makes you that much better. And then the other piece is don't quit your day job because even if you're getting a pretty significant advance, from a traditional publisher, they give it to you over the course of those 2 years. So they give you a third of it when you turn in your first draft, a third of it when you turn in your last draft, and then maybe a third of it when the book hits the shelves. So now this advance that seems so hefty is stretched over 2 years. So keep doing what you're doing to earn a living, and then you won't feel so stressed if you quit your day job and now you're really floundering.
Yep.
That's tough love advice, and then, sorry, I have one more really important one. If you're not getting an agent, it may be because your query is horrible, your query letter, which you need to use to get an agent. So you may just need to really work on that letter that actually introduces the agent to your book. And if the letter is terrible, they're just going to scroll. They're going to get rid of you. So that may be the missing piece. And so it took me 2 months to write my first query letter, which was longer than it took to write the first book.
That's interesting. That's something I didn't know. So we're about that time. I want to thank everyone again. Thank you so much for spending an evening with us, taking time out of your schedule to talk to everyone. I really do think everyone's going to appreciate it tonight and on who watches the show. Watches the piece on TV. I am taking down the information that everyone has put in their websites, their handles like that. So if anyone needs it, please just email us at the library. I'm actually going to put mine in. So if you have any questions, please reach out. We can share that if you need additional info. And thank you, everyone. And I hope everyone has a good evening. Stay safe, stays well, and good luck with all of your writing.
Emily, let's have lunch.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. It was
Bye.
wonderful.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Lindsay.
Have a good evening.
Thank you too.
You.